The land stretched out like an old wound, healed but never forgotten, dry, golden, and quiet. A sun barely risen painted the eastern rim of the world in soft amber, brushing across fields of wheatgrass that bowed and swayed in slow, whispering waves. The wind moved carefully here, as though it respected the age of things, weaving between the barbed wire fences and the dead trees that stood like forgotten sentinels along the ridge. Silas Creedy rose before the light touched his doorstep. The wooden floor creaked beneath his boots as he pulled on his coat, worn to the threads at the elbows. Coffee simmered on the iron stove behind him, scent curling through the dim room, but he didn't drink it. His eyes had found the horizon. Something in it unsettled him, not in threat, but in memory. Stillness could do that. He saddled his mule, a slow-footed creature named Widow, and rode out toward the southern edge of his property. The land here fell into a shallow draw, framed by tall cottonwoods and dotted with prairie dog mounds. His fence there had gone limp weeks back. He'd meant to fix it, but then July heat came heavy and loud with locusts, and Silas had spent too many days listening to the silence instead. This morning, though, felt different. The wind held a warning. The birds weren't singing. He dismounted near the fence line, the wire sagging like an old man's back, and knelt to assess the post. That's when he saw it. Not 10 paces away, under the shade of a leaning cottonwood, something broke the rhythm of the grass. A shape. Small, human, still. Silas didn't rush. He stood slowly, knees popping, and approached with measured steps. The boy lay curled on his side, face turned into the earth. Uniform blue, faded and stained with something darker, one boot missing. A cavalry hat crushed beside him. His back rose in shallow, irregular movements. He was alive, barely. No words passed between them. Silas crouched, felt for a pulse beneath the boy's jaw. It fluttered weak but certain. He lifted him, not roughly, not gently either, just with the care of someone who understood the weight of bodies and how not all of it came from bone. Widow carried them home without protest, her hooves muffled by the thick grass. The boy's head lolled against Silas's shoulder, breath hot and fevered. He muttered once, maybe a name or a place, but Silas didn't ask him to repeat it. The wind answered softly, and that was enough. The cabin was small, built by Silas's father's hands and aged into gray stillness. Inside, he laid the boy on his bed, the only one, and stoked the stove. He boiled water, cut cloth into strips, and cleaned the wound high on the boy's thigh, where blood had dried in rust-colored streaks. It wasn't a gunshot. Not a clean one, at least. More like shrapnel, jagged metal torn through meat. Infection had already started its slow crawl. Silas said nothing. He wiped the boy's brow with a wet rag, placed a basin by the bed, and sat in the old rocking chair by the window. Outside, the wind had picked up, pushing clouds low across the plains. Somewhere, far off, a hawk called out, long, mournful. The boy thrashed in sleep once, muttering again. Silas didn't react. He'd seen fever dreams before, in soldiers, in dying cattle, in his own brother, who hadn't returned whole from a war of someone else's making. He stayed beside the boy through the night, dozing lightly, waking every so often to change the compress, feed water from a tin cup, and mutter a quiet phrase or two into the dark. Not prayers, not quite. Just the sort of low speech a man uses when silence gets too heavy. At some point near dawn, the boy's fingers clenched around something. Silas noticed, leaned in. A letter, crumpled and sweat-stained, clenched tight against the boy's chest. He did not try to take it. By morning, the fever had broken, though not far. The boy slept, his breath a little steadier. Outside, the sky was a pale, uncertain gray. Wind stirred the wheatgrass again, this time with a gentler touch. Silas stood at the threshold of the cabin, eyes squinting toward the horizon. There, just for a moment, he thought he saw movement, something shifting at the edge of sight. Dust, maybe, or memory. It disappeared too quick to be sure. He stepped outside anyway. There was work to do. Fence to mend, mule to feed, rain might be coming, and he'd need to haul water if the creek didn't rise. Behind him, the boy breathed slow and shallow, still asleep, still silent. The letter remained clutched tight in his hand. The prairie wind moved around the cabin in long, spiraling breaths, as though pausing to consider the meaning of what it had found. Silas awoke to the sound of breath, not his own, not the mule's, but a younger, broken rhythm. Behind the bedroom curtain, the boy's chest rose and fell with a kind of determination, ragged but stubborn. A windless morning had taken hold outside, pinning the world beneath a quiet that felt stretched thin. Even the cicadas, so loud days before, seemed to hush in the presence of something tender. The boy slept still, his body curled toward the window where pale light brushed across the pillow in thin stripes. His cavalry coat lay folded over the back of a chair, stiff with dried blood and dirt. Silas had found the number 14 stitched beneath the collar, but nothing else. No name, no rank. Just a small silver pin shaped like a wing, bent at one edge, dulled by war or weather. Silas brewed coffee and poured 2 cups, though only one was touched. He sat on the back porch with the untouched cup beside him, as though honoring an absent guest. His eyes followed the fence line running west toward the low hills, where deer sometimes stood in the dusk, watching without interest. His hands rested on his knees, strong hands still, though a bit swollen in the joints, hands of a man who built more than he tore down. Inside, the boy began to murmur again, words but not whole, bits of places or people. One name came clear, Eli. Silas listened without turning. The name lingered in the cabin for a while, like dust catching in the window light, then disappeared into the floorboards. By noon, the boy tried to sit up. He failed, falling back against the pillow with a sharp inhale. Silas moved to him then, quietly, boots soft on the wooden floor, and offered water in a tin cup. The boy's fingers wrapped around it slowly, as though remembering how hands worked. "Drink it slow," Silas said, voice low and dry from disuse. The boy looked at him, startled to hear speech. His eyes, a dark hazel, gone almost black from fever, didn't hold fear, just confusion, maybe shame. He sipped. The cup trembled in his hand. Then, with surprising strength, he set it down on the crate beside the bed. I'm sorry, sir." Silas said nothing. He reached for the wash basin and replaced the damp cloth on the boy's forehead. The boy watched him for a long time, as if trying to place him in some mental map of kindness that no longer existed. "You the owner of this place?" the boy asked. Silas nodded once, expression unreadable. "I didn't mean to trespass. I must have walked for miles. I was with the column heading north, then—" He paused. "Then something hit. Don't remember much after." Silas stood slowly, the wood creaking beneath him. "You need to rest." The boy leaned back, grimacing as the wound reminded him it wasn't done speaking. "I don't know if they're still looking for me." That caught Silas's attention, though his face didn't show it. "Who's they?" The boy hesitated, then, "I don't rightly know anymore." Silas turned, stepped back out into the open air. He didn't need to ask more. There was a weight on the boy. Not just injury, but something deeper, something that chased people into empty places and left them clinging to silence. Days passed in a slow rhythm, like cattle chewing under shade. The boy, who never gave his name and was never asked for it, began to move with more strength. He could sit up now, limp across the cabin with a stick cut from the cottonwood out front. Silas watched but did not hover. He cooked, cleaned, and worked the land in long sweeps of solitude. The boy, too, learned to be silent, not out of fear but out of understanding. They shared meals without conversation. They drank coffee on the porch, 2 figures side by side, eyes on the horizon. Once a hawk passed overhead and cast a brief shadow over them. The boy followed it with his eyes, then whispered, "Used to see those back home, in the hills above Taylor Creek." Silas didn't reply. But the next day, he gave the boy a walking stick with a hawk carved at the handle, said nothing as he handed it over. The boy ran a finger along the carving, then nodded. That was enough. The letter remained with the boy always, sometimes clutched in sleep, sometimes tucked beneath his shirt. Silas never asked. One evening he noticed the boy reading it with trembling hands, face tight, breath shallow. He did not look up, and Silas pretended not to notice. Some grief had to be endured in private, even in company. One morning, while tending to the mule, Silas noticed something at the far edge of the property. Dust, rising in a slow spiral. Not wind-blown, not natural. Something moving, distant, small, but moving. He said nothing of it to the boy, but that night he loaded the shotgun, not to shoot, not to threaten, but to be reminded of the weight of choice. He placed it by the door and stared at it long after the boy had gone to bed. The next morning, the boy asked if he could help fix the broken saddle post. His voice was steady now, with something like purpose behind it. Silas considered, then nodded. They worked in the quiet for hours, passing tools, lifting wood, wrapping iron bands around worn leather. The sun was warm, but not cruel. The silence between them had become something else. No longer distance, but ritual. "Thank you," the boy said once softly, eyes not meeting Silas's. Silas hammered a nail and said nothing. The sound echoed across the prairie like a gunshot swallowed by time. That night, coyotes howled in long, uneven calls. The boy stood at the door and watched the sky. Stars had begun to emerge, the kind of stars you could hear if you listened long enough. In the dark, the boy whispered, "They're coming, aren't they?" Silas didn't answer. He stepped up beside him, looking out into the same distance. "Yes," he said finally. Then they both watched the night settle in like an old coat pulled tight around the shoulders, waiting for what the morning would bring. The wind had changed. It now came from the south, dry and low like a breath held too long. It carried with it the scent of horses, faint gunpowder, and campfire ash, not strong, not certain, but enough to remind the bones that something human and organized was near, the kind of scent a man doesn't learn to notice until he's been around soldiers. Silas noticed. He didn't tell the boy. Instead, he sharpened the blade on the draw knife and worked quietly on the splintered porch rail while the boy sat nearby, stripping bark from kindling with his hawk-handled stick. The wood shavings fell at his feet like curls of thin parchment. The silence between them was not empty. It was heavy with things left unsaid. Neither of them broke it. Later, they rode Widow out along the northern edge of the property. The boy, still limping, rode behind with stiff arms wrapped around Silas's waist, his breath catching with each jolt. They didn't go far. Silas just wanted to see the ridgeline, and there it was. Just a smudge on the distance at first, like heat shimmer, then clearer, a trail of smoke rising thin and deliberate, too precise for wildfire or settler, military, controlled, a cook fire or signal, maybe two. The boy didn't ask. He simply stared until his jaw tightened and his breath grew more shallow. Back at the cabin, Silas poured water from the barrel, washed his hands with slow movements, and spoke low. "They're riding patrols. Could be scouts or cavalry, maybe both." The boy looked down at his hands. "I didn't mean for them to follow." Silas said nothing. After a long while, the boy muttered, "I wasn't running away, not like a coward anyway." Still, Silas said nothing. He took the old lantern down from the beam, cleaned the glass slowly with a square of cloth. Outside, Widow kicked at the dry earth, restless. "They sent us ahead to clear a path to the Cheyenne River, said it'd be easy, said we'd just mark the trail and come back." The boy's voice was raw. "But we found something else out there, or it found us." Silas turned, eyes calm but unreadable. He didn't ask what. The boy wouldn't have answered if he had. "I wasn't the only one left, but I was the only one that could still walk." His hand brushed the folded letter again, still pressed close to his chest, as though it were stitched into his ribs. Silas gestured to the saddle post. Still work to do, less talk, more hands. The boy nodded and rose slowly, favoring his right leg. 2 days passed. The smoke disappeared. But Silas knew better than to trust clear skies. The cavalry didn't vanish. They waited, circled, listened. That's what they were best at. One evening, as the sun sagged into the grasslands, a rider appeared on the western trail. Dust rose behind him like a comet's tail, and the sun lit his figure gold, hat low, duster trailing, rifle holstered, but not forgotten. Silas met him near the cattle gate, leaning on the fence like a man watching for signs of weather. The rider was a neighbor, James Larrabee, whose spread lay 15 miles downriver, a man who spoke with his eyes more than his mouth. "You got visitors coming," Larrabee said, pulling back his reins. Silas didn't reply. "They passed through my north field this morning. 100 of them, by my guess, all spit-shined and quiet. Uniform? Blue coats, full brass, cavalry. They weren't asking. They were looking. One of their scouts saw the smoke from your chimney." Silas looked out toward the prairie where the grass shimmered in the cooling light. "How far? Day away, if they're moving slow?" Larrabee leaned in his saddle. "You got something they want, Silas?" Silas turned, his voice steady. "No, but maybe I got something they lost." The man nodded once, then tugged his reins. "Best not be here when they come." Silas said nothing, didn't move. Larrabee hesitated as if waiting for something more. When nothing came, he rode off, dust rising behind him like an echo. That night, Silas took the shotgun from behind the door and placed it across his lap. The boy watched him from the shadows of the hearth. "They're not coming for me to take me home," the boy said quietly. Silas glanced over. The firelight danced across the boy's face, thinner now, pale, but resolute. A boy's face carrying a man's weight. "They're coming because they don't want anyone asking what happened." Silas gave a small nod as though he already knew. "I didn't follow orders, that's what it comes down to. I didn't finish the job. I didn't clear the trail. I just left." "They leave a lot of boys behind," Silas said. His voice had the shape of rusted iron, slow, not unkind, but heavy. The boy unfolded the letter. "Finally. It's from my brother," he whispered. "He went west 2 years before me. Said the land was clean out here, that you could breathe right. Said he was building a place with his hands, not a gun." He held the paper like it might fall apart. "I kept it on me every day. Didn't open it till I was bleeding out under that tree." He looked up. "It said he'd died 6 months before, from fever. He was buried under a white cross near Bridger's Hollow." Silas stared at the fire. His mouth didn't move, but his hands did. They closed around the shotgun with quiet resolve. "You want me to run?" the boy asked. "No," Silas said, "but I want you to stand." The boy nodded slowly, then sat beside him. No words passed between them after that, only the sound of wood splitting in the fire, only the wind brushing the edge of the window pane, only breath. Outside, the sky turned iron gray, and a crescent moon rose over the ridgeline like a knife half buried in the earth. The sun came slow over the hills, dragging its light like an old man pulling a heavy coat. Pale gold lit the wheatgrass in trembling waves, and the earth held its breath. There were no birds this morning, no cicadas, no wind. Silas stood in the field, boots damp with dew, hands quiet at his sides. His hat was pulled low, casting half his face in shadow. Behind him, the boy was at the porch rail, fingers clenched white on the wood. A tin cup of coffee rested beside him, untouched. His walking stick, the one with the carved hawk, leaned against the doorframe. They hadn't spoken since before dawn. There'd been no need. Some truths settle into a house without knocking. The boy had dressed in silence, not in the cavalry coat, which now hung over the back of a kitchen chair like a ghost refusing to rise, but in plain canvas and flannel. His boots were mismatched, one his own, one from Silas's storeroom, but they held. His steps, still uneven, had grown stronger, though pain flickered behind each movement. Out in the pasture, the mule widow shifted her weight and snorted softly. The sky above was wide, cloudless, endless, and then it came. At first, just a shimmer on the far line of the earth, movement without detail, like heat rising from a griddle. Then, the faintest thump far off and rhythmic, like a second heartbeat beneath the soil. Hooves. The sound thickened, grew layered. Not a small patrol, not scouts. This was full force. Horses in rows, Saddles creaking, spurs tapping, 100 men or more moving with grim precision. Not racing, not charging, just coming. The boy stepped down from the porch and stood beside Silas in the open field. His eyes squinted against the light, mouth a thin line. No fear, just something more hollow, like a prayer offered to no one in particular. "They're not going to ask," he said. Silas said nothing. His gaze remained fixed on the horizon. As the cavalry drew closer, the details emerged. Sun flashing off brass buckles, bedrolls strapped in neat symmetry, flags tucked but not raised, faces unreadable beneath brims and shadows. They stopped 100 yards out, a wall of horse and man, dust curling around their boots. No weapons raised, no bugle, just the oppressive weight of presence, like a courtroom without speech. Then, from the front rank, one rider dismounted. He was older, maybe late 50s, with graying temples and a narrow frame. His uniform was sharp, boots polished, gloves tucked under one arm. He walked forward slowly, alone, his spurs silent against the grass. The boy stood straighter, hands at his sides. Silas didn't move. The officer stopped 10 paces away and removed his hat. His eyes moved over the boy, pausing briefly at the wound, then settled on Silas. "You Creedy?" he asked. Silas gave the smallest of nods. The officer looked past him toward the cabin, where the front door hung open, and morning light pooled across the floorboards. "Man said you found someone on your land," the officer continued, quiet but firm. "We were looking for him." Silas didn't speak. He didn't need to. The boy stepped forward. "You can tell them I'm here," he said. "You can say you found what you lost." The officer regarded him with a long, slow blink. "And what would you like me to do with that information, son?" The boy hesitated. "Whatever you were going to do." The officer let out a breath, not quite a sigh. "You think I got orders to hang you? That it?" The boy's jaw clenched. "Wouldn't surprise me." The officer turned, looked back at the wall of cavalrymen behind him. None had dismounted. None had moved. "We ain't here to drag no wounded boy from a bed," he said, half to Silas, half to the dust. "We're here because a column was lost. Because the chain of command wants answers. Clean ones, ones that read well in letters home." He looked back at the boy. "Are you going to give me a story that makes sense, Private?" The boy shook his head. "No, sir, I'm not." The officer looked at Silas then, really looked, at the weather-beaten lines, the tired eyes, the silence wrapped around him like a second skin. Something passed between them, a kind of recognition, a past neither wanted to revisit. Then, slowly, the officer raised his right hand, not to the boy, to Silas. He saluted him, crisp and full. Silas didn't return it. He only watched. The officer turned, walked back to his horse, and mounted. No signal was given, but the column began to turn in quiet synchrony, like a tide receding. One by one, they peeled away, heading south. Within minutes, the field was empty again. No dust, no echo. Just two figures in the grass, watching silence reclaim the world. They didn't go inside right away. The boy sat down on the porch step and let his legs stretch out in front of him. Silas stood behind him, arms crossed. "What was that?" the boy asked finally. "Mercy," Silas said. The boy looked up. "Whose?" Silas didn't answer. His gaze had drifted to the hills beyond, to the place where the cavalry had vanished, to the sky slowly brightening with the coming heat. Inside the cabin, the letter lay folded on the table, untouched. The coffee had gone cold. After a while, Silas picked up a hammer and a bucket of nails and walked out toward the barn, where the gate had come loose again. The boy stood, still slow, still favoring one leg, and followed. They worked side by side, the quiet broken only by the clang of iron and the knock of wood, a rhythm without words. The sun rose above them, high and blinding, but neither man blinked. Morning came without announcement. The sun rose out of the earth like it belonged to no one, not the ranchers, not the soldiers, not the ghosts buried beneath prairie stone. It moved slow, stretching long fingers of light across the wheatgrass, stirring up gold from every blade, as if trying to remember what had happened here. The world was still again, and in that stillness the ranch awoke, not with motion, but with breath, the faint creak of wood, the rustle of a canvas sleeve. The clink of a hammer dropped gently in a pail. Inside the cabin, the boy stood near the hearth. His uniform coat was gone, folded, and buried beneath the porch steps the night before, not discarded but laid to rest. He wore plain clothes now, a soft blue shirt with the collar worn thin and sleeves rolled just above the wrists. His boots were tied tight. He walked with a limp, yes, but no longer like a wound, more like a memory he intended to carry. Silas had risen early. He always did. When the sun cracked the horizon, he was already out by the fence line with a spool of wire and a bucket of nails, hammer tucked through his belt. The old mule grazed nearby, twitching at flies. The prairie wind had returned, easy now, dragging the scent of cut grass and dry earth. The boy joined him without a word. He carried a coil of rope across one shoulder and dropped it beside the post where Silas knelt. For a moment they worked without speaking, without glancing at each other. Just two sets of hands busy with the morning's rhythm. Wire stretched tight, nails tapped in, board shifted into place with the creak of use and time. Then, somewhere in that space between moments, Silas spoke. "Storm last fall took out most of the west line. Never had time to fix it." The boy nodded, brushing sawdust from his forearm. "I can help." Silas glanced at him just once, then returned to the post. "You plan to stay?" The boy hesitated. The answer wasn't easy because it hadn't been fully formed yet, but something in the sky, something in the air. It asked for roots, not answers. "I don't know where else to go," he said. Silas didn't reply, but his hands worked more slowly now, as though making space. They finished the post by midday. The sun sat high overhead, heat flattening the land into quiet shapes. Crickets sang low in the grass. Cicadas stirred from the tree line, not with panic, but with that summer drone that meant the day had settled into itself. Back at the cabin, the boy sat on the porch rail, legs swinging gently. His fingers toyed with the hawk-carved stick. The cuts in the wood had smoothed over time, burnished by touch. He ran his thumb along the grain and stared out over the fields. Beyond the ridge, the land fell into deep silence. The cavalry hadn't returned. There had been no sound of hooves, no figures against the skyline, just the wind and the sky and the hum of insects in tall grass, as if they'd never come at all. Inside, the letter remained where it had been left, folded neatly on the corner of the table, its creases worn and edges curled from handling. The boy hadn't touched it again. It had done its work. That afternoon, Silas poured coffee into 2 tin cups. They sat side by side on the porch, hands warmed by the sun and the metal, watching the land breathe. A pair of doves flew low across the field, skimming the fence line with loose, soft wings. The boy watched them go. "I never fired my rifle," he said after a while. "Out there, in the column, not once." Silas sipped his coffee. "You don't have to kill to be changed by war." The boy looked down, nodding. "I kept thinking, if I died out there, no one would know my name. I'd just be a number on a list. Missing, presumed dead. Nothing more." He paused. "I think I came out of the trees just to be seen." Silas leaned forward, elbows on knees. His voice was quiet. "You were?" The wind picked up, lifting the edge of the boy's sleeve, brushing dust across the porch boards. Somewhere in the distance, a pair of crows cried out, sharp, echoing calls that didn't linger. They finished the coffee without rush. Later, they mended the porch rail, replacing the last splintered beam with a sanded board from the old shed. The boy held the wood steady while Silas nailed it in with slow, deliberate strikes. Each blow echoed across the prairie like a heartbeat, made of iron and labor. When the last nail was driven, Silas stood back and examined the line. It was straight, strong. The boy nodded. "Looks right." Silas didn't answer. He just bent, picked up the pail, and turned toward the barn. At dusk, they lit the lantern on the porch. The flame flickered in the glass, casting long shadows across the steps. Moths circled. The wind blew in steady from the west, and behind them, The land lay wide and open, untouched by the sound of boots or orders. The cavalry had taken their questions and gone. What they left behind wasn't a deserter or a boy or even a name. What remained was something quieter, something heavier, a soul scraped raw and set down gently in the dry soil, given space to grow back slow. In the distance, the first stars appeared, faint, flickering, but certain. The boy watched them with steady eyes. He didn't speak again that night. Neither did Silas. They sat long past dark, the silence between them now a shared country, bound not by blood or oath, but by something older, work, witness, and the simple mercy of being allowed to remain. And when the first breeze of dawn touched their faces, cool and fresh and full of unspoken things, they looked out at the bare earth before them. The sun rose slow and kind, and the two of them, one old, one young, stood without ceremony and stepped back into the field. No flags, no farewells, just breath, just sky, just the sound of nails driven into wood as the land welcomed another morning.